We want to look ahead now to the G20 next week and how the China-U.S. relationship could affect the summit and its agenda. For that, we reached Yves Tiberghien. He's a distinguished fellow at the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada and a professor of political science at UBC. We reached him in Vancouver. As with any international summit, this G20 has an official agenda and an unofficial agenda, too. Let's start with the official agenda because Argentina is hosting this for the first time in South America. What should we be watching for in that regard?
Well, so the official agenda that was set by Argentina, which really has continuity with the Germans just before, were some structural quality topics like the future of work in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, or issues like international taxation, or issues like infrastructure financing. So that's what they started doing at the beginning of their year. And then now we got three big topics that are crashing the party. One is the Argentinian crisis and the issue of emerging market crisis and financial potential crisis. The other one is the U.S. China conflict, and the other one is the future of the trading system and the WTO.
And that really plays into that, that side issue of the trade dispute that's going on and the much deeper disagreements between the U.S. and China. One would think that sort of whole notion of infrastructure development and international development plays into China's agenda.
Right. So that started, that issue of infrastructure started with the Australians back in 2014. And then China in 2016, chairing the G20, really picked it up. And it continued through the Germans and now the Argentinians. So yeah, it's on one hand, there's a big need from a developing countries' perspective. And on the other hand, now we have the issue around Belt and Road Initiative and the clash that happened at APEC between the US and China. So it used to be a sort of quiet technical development topic, and now it's become an international confrontation as well.
Do you think the whole U.S.-China question is going to hijack this meeting?
Yes.
In a word, yes.
In a word, yes. Because we have this whole Trump-Xi Jinping summit that's going to happen on December 1, right? The night after the G20 closes. And he's going to suck the oxygen. And the whole game, of how China and the U.S. behave before that at the G20 summit will attract all attention. The media will be all about that, and so it will take a lot of the oxygen. We also saw at the APEC summit that this U.S.-China conflict prevented a communique. They fought over trade, but in the G20, we know now they're fighting over trade and over climate. And other things, but maybe infrastructure as well. So we have a pretty heated battle here.
There have been some signals from both the U.S. and from China that they are trying to take some of the heat out of the room in advance of this meeting. But what does it mean for the G20 itself when it gets overtaken by these two big players?
Yeah, so there is two scenarios, right? Scenario one, the G20 may just ignore trade and climate. This is what we hear now, that they may water down. I think that's the preferences of the Argentinian government. They want to essentially avoid the big topics. But that means that they end up punting the most important questions that the world needs to make progress on. Are we going to have a WTO next year? So they may punt it and just take it out. So that's option one, and that's the consequence of that as well. The G20 is less relevant. And the alternative is they have an actual clash, and the bilateral summit takes all the attention. And that means that at the moment, it's very hard for the G20 as 20 to do anything really that's meaningful in terms of global governance and solving global problems. And so a question will arise on whether the other 18 or a subset of them should do more.
I want to throw one other aspect into this, and that's whether or not Prince Mohammed bin Salman shows up from Saudi Arabia, and what that does to, well, I think about it in terms of what that does for that family photo they all stand for. Who's going to stand beside him?
Right. Yeah, that's a huge question, and yeah, that's a very hot potato. I really wonder what will happen. For sure, there are some countries that will have a hard time being next to MBS. as we call him, these three letters.
Mm-hmm.
There are others like the U.S. were fine. I wonder what they will do. Yeah, it's hard to see the solution yet.
Mm-hmm. Overall, when you sort of look at the global dynamics that are at play here now and how important they are, what does that mean for the kind of multilateral organizations like APEC, like the G20 or the G7, and how they're actually able to function and even make a difference?
Yeah, so that's the key question. So we essentially are in the midst of a perfect storm. On one hand, we have more needs for global cooperation and global governance. We have real serious issues. We could have a new financial crisis next year. We have a trading crisis. We could see the collapse of the WTO. We have a climate crisis. The IPCC report hinted that we need to move faster to implement the Paris Agreement. So we have a migrant crisis. So we have big global issues that require those countries to get together. And on the other hand, we have a real hot confrontation between the main power, the U.S., and the emerging future power, China, that is sucking the oxygen out of the process in all those organizations. So we do have a perfect storm. In all the preparation meetings that we have, Think 20 and all this, there's still great energy in solving problems. We saw it at the Paris Peace Forum. There's still that spirit of 2015 when things really worked well with the SDGs at the UN, Paris Agreement. So there is that spirit on one hand, but the US and China are kind of really, eyeballing each other in a way that's sucking the oxygen out for the progress of all institutions.
So let me ask you then finally, what's the role for Canada here in that circumstance?
Well, so I think Canada is part of the group of countries, the middle powers, with the EU, with Japan, with many others, with Mexico and others, that could end up representing it's sort of the more high ground or the multilateral spirit. And maybe what they will need to do is to move forward as a group first and put issues on the table, even if the US and China have a hard time. Right? And particularly, so here, in fact, we can get China on board for things like climate, things like even some trading principles, but we can't get the US right now. They're against any global governance and any global institutions. So maybe Canada has to take the lead with other countries and push the envelope, right? And see if we can get the US back later after a future election.
Thank you very much for your expertise on this.
It's a pleasure.